We saw what happened in Western Australia with the Aboriginal cultural heritage laws. If you owned land marginally bigger than a quarter-acre block, you had to, for a brief time, get special approval from some Aboriginal heritage outfit to do so much as drive a fence post into the ground or build a letterbox or plant a tree. And that's exactly what a bunch of volunteers found out when they tried to plant trees by the Canning River. A local Aboriginal corporation demanded $2.5 million to get approval. Now, those laws didn't last very long, funnily enough. Would have absolutely halted development in Western Australia. It would have taken the power away from landowners and put it in the hands of faceless Aboriginal-run corporations that could essentially blackmail you into paying them to do stuff with your own land. Now we have an adjacent situation in South Australia, where a major housing development in Adelaide's north has been halted by the discovery of Aboriginal bones. Now, this is a $3 billion development by Lang Walker, big developer. It's set to have 12,000 homes and 40,000 people after it's completed over the next 20 years. Now, it took Lang Walker 16 years to get the thing up and running in the first place. But in July, they found bones, which were reported to the police, and then Kaurna Yerta Aboriginal Corporation was brought in to oversee the site while the bones were investigated. The remains of at least 29 people have now been found. The state government has stopped the development as a result.
Thankfully, the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and the Attorney General in South Australia has issued effectively a stop work order on that project under the appropriate legislation, and that has now been paused, and the remains have to be removed in a culturally sensitive way. And he has that powers legislatively.
Now, that was from Q&A earlier in the month. Aboriginal actress Natasha Wanganeen was also on that episode. She's now become one of the chief agitators against Riverlea. She and others seemingly want to stop development altogether where bones are found. Now, I'll get back to that in a moment, because mark my words, if we stop this development because of the discovery of Aboriginal bones, it will have huge ramifications for all future developments in this country. This is what Ms Wanganeen said to SA Premier Peter Malinauskas on Q&A.
Well, right now, my people are getting dug up out at Riverlea, and I know you know about this, Peter, right? How can I be proud of you digging up my people out there? There's over 300 plus bodies out there, and in the last couple of months, 31 of my ancestors, and my family's here in the audience too, that's their ancestors as well, have been pulled out the ground. It is very disrespectful, and I can't respect a government that won't respect over 65,000 years of my culture.
The movement to end this project and leave the land alone has started gaining momentum. Kaurna elders have called for groundworks to stop and asked why anyone would want to live on a burial site. Then there was a protest at the Riverlea site on Saturday, calling for the development to stop altogether.
There are renewed calls for construction to come to a complete halt at the Riverlea housing estate north of the city. 29 sets of ancient Aboriginal remains have been uncovered, and protesters say no further work should be allowed.
Now, Ms Wanganeen spoke at this protest. She began by suggesting no houses should be built where people had previously been buried.
You've got family buried here in Adelaide right now? What would you do if I went out there with a shovel and started digging them up and bagging them up and telling you, sorry, I want to put my house there? Would you be okay with that?
No. Now, if you plan to build a housing estate on top of a marked existing cemetery that we can see on a map and is run by a cemetery authority, then yes, you'd have an argument. It's not generally good practice to build on top of places we understand to be burial sites. But the issue here isn't that it wasn't known to be a burial site. You know, it was an inadvertent discovery, and the developers did the right thing in alerting the police. If we're to say, well, if your land turns out to be a burial site, you can no longer develop it or do anything with it, then why would anyone take the risk of buying land and investing money in development? It would essentially render your investment a dead asset, pardon the pun. Why would you bother? And we're already pressed enough for housing as it is. But it is also a fact that many places around Australia have been built on known burial grounds of non-Aboriginal people. The old Sydney burial ground, for instance, was set up in 1792. Today, the Sydney Town Hall and parts of the Town Hall railway station sit on that land. They were still finding graves there in the 70s, and even more recently. The Sydney City Council website says that in 2003, graves were discovered to the north of Sydney Town Hall during building works for a new forecourt area. Then, in September 2007, with new building works about to commence, evidence of grave sites was again uncovered beneath the lower Town Hall. Initial site-specific archaeological investigations point to the remnants of at least 50 simple graves. They didn't stop work because of that. Central Station in Sydney was also built on an old cemetery. The remains were exhumed and sent elsewhere in these cases, as they should be. But development didn't stop, and that's when they knew these were burial sites. Ms Wanganeen also issued some kind of threat to people who buy houses at Riverlea.
Anyone thinking about buying a house here, just remember you're putting your spirit and your soul at risk. There are things at play that we cannot stop. And it will come for you if you don't do the right thing, in many different ways.
It will come for you in many different ways. Sounds scary. Then she peddled a discredited line that it was not just a burial site, but the site of a massacre.
Anyone thinking about buying a house here, just remember you're putting your spirit and your soul at risk. There are things at play that we cannot stop. And it will come for you if you don't do the right thing, in many different ways.
Mr Malinauskas told the ABC today that, according to an archaeological assessment, that was not the case.
The latest advice that I've received over the course of the weekend was that there has been very recently an archaeological assessment conducted on the site with that question of whether or not these are remains from a potential massacre. And that archaeological assessment, we have been advised, has ruled out the massacre. Apparently, the way that the burial has taken place is consistent with practices well before colonial times. So the assessment that's been conducted on this point rules that out.
Even if it were the site of a supposed massacre, you respectfully remove the remains and take them somewhere else. If they knew this was a burial site, someone would have said something about it long before the excavators moved in. If the activists win this fight and Lang Walker is prevented from continuing to develop that land, then every landowner in the country should be up in arms. I mean, what happens if you knock over your home to subdivide the land and in the process of building a cellar, you find bones? The precedent will have been set. You may as well kiss the value of your asset goodbye. If it's a known Aboriginal burial site, then don't touch it. That's completely understandable, just as you wouldn't touch an ordinary cemetery. But development and progress cannot be held hostage by Aboriginal history that not even Aboriginal people seem to know existed.